Tommy Mitchell was like any other 5-year-old boy, tucked into bed each night by his loyal German shepherd, Ranger, a nightly ritual that started after his father's tragic car accident 6 months ago. But when Ranger began pawing at the floorboards beneath Tommy's bed, growling at strange cars parked across the street, and positioning himself between Tommy and friendly neighbors, Sarah Mitchell dismissed it as canine grief until she discovered the hidden compartment in Ranger's collar, containing a blood-stained microchip and a note in her late husband's handwriting. What Sarah found on that chip made her blood run cold, confirming her worst fear: Ryan's death was no accident, and the people responsible were watching their home right now. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Oak Ridge, Montana was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other, a picturesque lakeside community nestled between towering pine-covered mountains, where summer tourists came for fishing and winter brought skiers to nearby slopes. It was this postcard-perfect setting that Ryan Mitchell had chosen for his family 6 years ago, claiming he wanted Tommy to grow up with fresh air and open spaces. But Sarah now wondered if the isolated location had served another purpose entirely. Ryan had been a security specialist for North Star defense contractors, his work often shrouded in vague explanations about consulting and risk assessment. He traveled frequently, sometimes disappearing for weeks before returning with tired eyes and tight smiles. Still, when he was home, Ryan had been a devoted father, teaching Tommy to fish in the summer, building snow forts in winter, and always maintaining their nightly bedtime ritual of stories, prayers, and tucking in. Sarah ran her fingers through her shoulder-length blonde hair, staring out the kitchen window at the still waters of the lake. At 32, the elementary school teacher had reduced her hours to part-time since Ryan's death, the dark circles under her blue eyes testament to sleepless nights spent questioning everything she thought she knew about her husband. Tommy hadn't spoken more than a few words to anyone except Ranger since the funeral. The kindergartner's selective mutism concerned his teachers, but the child psychologist assured Sarah it was a normal grief response that would likely resolve with time and patience. What wasn't normal was the way Ranger had transformed from family pet to fierce guardian. Ryan had brought Ranger home 3 years ago, already fully grown and trained. "He's a retired military dog," Ryan had explained, "but he's perfect for our family now." Sarah had questioned the choice. Wouldn't a puppy be better for a toddler? But Tommy and Ranger had bonded instantly. Now, watching Ranger meticulously check the locks each night before lying across Tommy's bedroom threshold, Sarah realized there was much more to the German Shepherd than Ryan had ever revealed. The bedtime routine that had once been Ryan's special time with Tommy had been seamlessly adopted by Ranger the very night after the funeral, as if the dog had been instructed exactly what to do if Ryan never came home again. The last day of Ryan Mitchell's life had begun like any other. Sarah remembered how he'd kissed Tommy goodbye, ruffled Ranger's fur, and promised to be home for dinner. "Fish tacos tonight," he'd said with that crooked smile that still made her heart flutter after 8 years of marriage. But by noon, everything had changed. The phone call came while Sarah was grading papers during her lunch break at Oak Ridge Elementary. Ryan's voice had been tight, controlled in a way that instantly set off alarm bells. "I need you to listen carefully. Sarah, there are some documents in my home office in the false bottom of the file cabinet. If anything happens to me, give them to James Reynolds at the Bureau. Nobody else. Do you understand?" Before she could ask questions, he'd added, "I love you both more than anything," and hung up. She'd tried calling back a dozen times, each attempt going straight to voicemail. By 3 o'clock, 2 police officers stood at her classroom door. The words "accident" and "didn't suffer" floated around her like debris in a flood, never quite landing. Ryan's SUV had gone off Mountain Pass Road, plunging 300 feet into the ravine below. The vehicle had burst into flames on impact. Dental records would be needed for positive identification. "It appears he was alone in the vehicle, ma'am," Officer Daniels had said, his young face solemn beneath his hat. "We'll know more after a full investigation, but the preliminary assessment suggests a brake failure." Sarah had nodded numbly, thinking of Ryan's meticulous attention to vehicle maintenance. He'd never allow a mechanical problem to go unaddressed. Telling Tommy had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. The little boy had stared at her with uncomprehending eyes, then looked to Ranger as if the dog might contradict this impossible news. Ranger had whined softly, padding over to Tommy and pressing his warm body against the child. That night, for the first time, Ranger had pulled the blankets up with his teeth, nudged Tommy's favorite stuffed dinosaur closer, and licked away the tears streaming down the boy's face before settling vigilantly at the foot of the bed. The funeral brought a sea of unfamiliar faces. Men in dark suits with military posture offered condolences with perfect, emotionless precision. One man lingered longer than the others, introducing himself as Martin Cooper, CEO of North Star. "Ryan was one of our most valuable team members," he'd said, his silver hair catching the sunlight, hand resting just a moment too long on Sarah's shoulder. "Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything at all." Ranger had growled low in his throat when Cooper approached Tommy, the sound so unexpected that Sarah had jerked the dog back by his collar, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. He's been protective since Ryan." She couldn't finish the sentence. Cooper had smiled thinly. "Understandable. Military dogs form strong attachments." He'd knelt to Tommy's level. "Your daddy was a brave man, son, a true American hero." Tommy had said nothing, pressing closer to Ranger's side. The police investigation concluded within 2 weeks. Mechanical failure, just as they'd suspected. Case closed. Sarah had searched the file cabinet that night but found nothing resembling a false bottom or hidden documents. Maybe the stress had made Ryan paranoid, she told herself. Maybe it was all just tragic coincidence. But the nightmares began. Tommy would wake screaming about bad men coming to take him away. Only Ranger could calm him. The massive shepherd curling protectively around the small boy until his sobs subsided. At school, Tommy stopped speaking entirely, communicating through nods or head shakes when absolutely necessary. His teacher suggested counseling. Tommy seems to have developed an unhealthy attachment to the dog. Ellen Johnson, the school counselor, explained during their first session. It's becoming a crutch that prevents him from processing his grief appropriately. Sarah watched through the office window as Tommy sat in the waiting area, whispering into Ranger's ear while the dog listened with pricked ears and intelligent eyes. "Ranger is the only thing giving him comfort right now," she defended. "I understand." But Ellen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Children sometimes create magical thinking around pets during trauma. Tommy may believe Ranger can somehow bring his father back, or that the dog knows something we don't. A month after Ryan's death, the first truly alarming incident occurred. Sarah had watched from the kitchen window as Tommy played in the front yard with Ranger. A dark sedan had pulled up similar to the one driven by their neighbor, Frank Watson. The man inside had called Tommy's name, waving him over. Tommy had started toward the car when Ranger suddenly lunged forward, blocking the boy's path and barking ferociously at the vehicle. The car had sped away before Sarah could reach the door. When she questioned Tommy, he'd simply whispered to Ranger, "Good boy," and refused to acknowledge the incident had even happened. That night, Sarah checked all the locks twice before going to bed, unease settling in her stomach like cold lead. 3 months after Ryan's death, Sarah found herself standing in his home office, staring at the walls lined with bookshelves and framed family photos. She hadn't changed anything since the accident, allowing dust to gather on his desk where a coffee mug still sat half full, now a science experiment of mold and evaporation. Sarah had been avoiding this room, but with Tommy's behavior growing increasingly concerning and Ranger's vigilance bordering on aggression, she knew she needed answers. The filing cabinet proved exactly as she remembered: no false bottom, no hidden compartment. Frustrated, Sarah sank into Ryan's leather desk chair and opened his laptop. She'd tried this before, but the password protection had defeated her attempts, this time on a whim. She typed Ranger Tommy 2019, the year they'd brought Ranger home. The screen flickered to life, revealing Ryan's desktop. Most files were mundane work reports, tax documents, fantasy football spreadsheets. But a folder labeled simply Insurance caught her eye. Inside were encrypted files requiring another password. Sarah tried every combination she could think of: birthdays, anniversaries, pet names, but nothing worked. As the sun set outside the window, she reluctantly closed the laptop, telling herself she'd try again tomorrow. The phone rang at 11:42 that night. Sarah fumbled for her cell phone, squinting at the unfamiliar number before answering. "Mrs. Mitchell." The male voice was hushed, urgent. "I worked with Ryan. Don't say my name. Don't trust anyone who comes to your house, especially if they claim they worked with your husband." "Who is this?" Sarah demanded, heart racing. "Check behind the water heater in your basement. And Mrs. Mitchell, trust the dog." The line went dead. Sarah spent the rest of the night sleepless, jumping at every creak of the old house. In the morning, after sending Tommy to school with a neighbor's child, she descended to the basement. The water heater stood in the corner, decades old and groaning. Sarah moved cautiously behind it, running her fingers along the wall until she felt it a small envelope taped securely out of sight. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "If you're reading this, I failed. Password Tango Mike Foxtrot 2015. Sarah's hands trembled. The precision of Ryan's handwriting, so familiar and now so precious, brought tears to her eyes. She returned upstairs, powering up the laptop and entering the password into the encrypted folder. Files appeared, dozens of them. Financial records, emails, photographs. Sarah was still trying to make sense of them when her phone rang again. Tommy's school. "Mrs. Mitchell, we have a situation with Tommy," the principal explained carefully. He became extremely agitated during recess when Dr. Emily Winters approached him. Ranger positioned himself between them and wouldn't let the doctor near Tommy. I'm afraid the dog was quite intimidating. Dr. Winters was the child psychologist Sarah had reluctantly agreed to let evaluate Tommy. "I'll be right there," she promised, hastily shutting the laptop. At school, she found Tommy sitting silently in the principal's office, one hand buried in Ranger's fur. Dr. Winters, a tall woman with sharp features and professionally sympathetic eyes, stood as Sarah entered. "Mrs. Mitchell, I believe we need to discuss your son's dependency on this animal. She began without preamble. This behavior is preventing Tommy from developing healthy coping mechanisms. I strongly recommend separating them, at least during therapy sessions. Ranger stays with Tommy, Sarah replied, more firmly than she intended. Doctor, Winter's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, I understand your reluctance, but this attachment is becoming pathological. Tommy isn't speaking to humans because he doesn't need to. He's transferred all his communication needs to the dog. He's grieving, Sarah countered. Yes, and grief requires proper channels for expression. Dr. Winters lowered her voice. Sarah, I'm concerned that your own grief may be clouding your judgment about what's best for Tommy. The drive home was silent. Tommy staring out the window while Ranger sat vigilantly beside him in the back seat. Sarah's mind raced with everything that had happened, the encrypted files, the mysterious phone call. Dr. Winter's warning. Something was very wrong, but she couldn't piece it together. At home, Sarah immediately noticed the kitchen window was slightly ajar, a window she distinctly remembered closing before leaving. Ranger tensed, hackles raising as he moved protectively in front of Tommy. Stay in the car, Sarah instructed, trying to keep her voice calm. Lock the doors. She approached the house cautiously, phone in hand, ready to call 911. Nothing seemed disturbed inside, but the hairs on her neck stood up as she moved from room to room. In Ryan's office, the laptop was exactly where she'd left it, but she could swear the angle was different. Someone had been here. That evening, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah met her elderly neighbor Harold Whitaker on her back porch. At 72, the retired Army veteran had always been kind but distant until now. I saw someone at your window today, he said without preamble, his weathered face serious in the porch light. Man in a dark jacket, professional, not some random burglar. Sarah's blood ran cold. Did you call the police? Harold shook his head. By the time I got my phone, he was gone. But that's not why I'm here. He nodded toward Ranger, visible through the window lying at the foot of Tommy's bed. That dog, he's not just any German shepherd. He's got specialized training, military grade. Ryan said he was retired military, but not just any military. Harold interrupted. Those are specific commands I saw your boy using. Silent hand signals, Special Forces K-9 unit training. He leaned closer. Mrs. Mitchell, whoever your husband was, he made sure that dog could protect your son from more than just ordinary dangers. Sarah felt her world tilt. What are you saying? I'm saying Ryan Mitchell wasn't just some corporate security consultant, and that dog knows it. Harold stood to leave. Keep your doors locked, Sarah, and maybe, just maybe, start paying attention to what that dog is trying to tell you. That night, Sarah watched as Ranger performed his usual bedtime ritual with Tommy pulling up the covers, nudging the dinosaur close, lying across the threshold. But this time, she noticed how his ears constantly adjusted, alert to every sound, how his body remained tense even in rest, how his eyes occasionally flicked to the window, then the door, then back to Tommy, not a pet comforting a grieving child. She realized with growing certainty, a soldier following final orders. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn, her mind racing with questions. She sat at her kitchen table, laptop open before her, scrolling through the files she'd found on the USB drive. Much of it seemed to be financial records from North Star defense contractors' spreadsheets, bank transfers, and procurement documents. To her untrained eye, it looked like standard business operations, though the sums involved made her breath catch. Millions of dollars moving between accounts with clinical alphanumeric labels. One document stood out, a memo from Ryan to Martin Cooper, dated 3 weeks before the accident. Concerns regarding Project Blackwater client list and unauthorized technology transfer. The memo detailed Ryan's discovery of security protocols being bypassed and sensitive information potentially being sold to unnamed foreign entities. His language was careful, professional, framing it as a potential oversight rather than deliberate malfeasance. The final line sent a chill through Sarah. "I'll compile a complete report once I've verified these discrepancies." A soft whine drew her attention. Ranger stood in the doorway, ears alert, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost human. The German shepherd padded to the back door, looking over his shoulder expectantly. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, following him. She opened the door, and Ranger shot into the backyard, circling the perimeter with military precision. Nose to the ground, he stopped suddenly at the edge of the woods, hackles raised, a low growl vibrating in his throat. Sarah scanned the tree line but saw nothing amiss in the gray morning light. Still, she trusted the dog's instincts enough to call Tommy downstairs early, packed his lunch herself rather than letting him buy at school, and drove him instead of allowing him to take the bus. "Mommy, Ranger says we're being watched," Tommy whispered as they pulled into the school parking lot. They were the first words he'd spoken directly to her in weeks. Sarah's hand froze on the gear shift. "What do you mean, sweetie?" Tommy stroked Ranger's head. "Daddy told him to tell me if bad people came." The 5-year-old's matter-of-fact tone made the statement all the more chilling. "When did Daddy tell him that—" Sarah kept her voice deliberately light. Tommy shrugged. "Before, Daddy said if anything happened to him, Ranger would protect me from the bad people who might come." His blue eyes, so like Ryan's, met hers. The bad people who hurt Daddy. Sarah fought to keep her expression neutral, despite the racing of her heart. "Tommy, do you remember anything else Daddy might have told you about the bad people?" "He said they worked with him, but they weren't his friends." Tommy turned to look out the window, effectively ending the conversation. Sarah watched him walk into school with his teacher. Ranger dutifully at his side. The school had granted special permission for the dog to accompany Tommy as an emotional support animal after Ryan's death. Now Sarah wondered if her husband had engineered even that contingency. Later that morning, Sarah met with Harold in his garage workshop, bringing printouts of some of the documents she'd found. The retired veteran adjusted his reading glasses, poring over the papers with a methodical patience born from decades of military discipline. "Look at these transfers," he finally said, pointing to a series of numbers. "Same amount, same day each month, but being routed through 3 different shell companies before landing in this account in the Caymans." He looked up at her. "Your husband found a money trail." "But to where?" "For what?" Sarah pressed. Harold removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "If I had to guess, someone at North Star is selling classified information. Defense contractors have access to some of our most sensitive military and intelligence specs. Selling that to the wrong people." He let the implication hang. "And Ryan found out." Sarah whispered, the reality of her husband's final days taking shape. "That would explain a few things." Harold hesitated. Including why that dog is trained the way he is. German Shepherds like Ranger, they're not just pets. Special forces use them for very specific operations. That dog can probably detect explosives, attack on command, even create diversions if needed. But why would Ryan bring home a military dog for his family? Harold's weathered face softened. Because he knew he was in danger. Sarah. And he wanted to make sure Tommy had protection if the worst happened. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Sarah gathered the papers quickly, shoving them into her bag as Harold went to answer. Through the workshop window, she saw a tall man in a crisp suit standing on the porch. Even from a distance, his official bearing was unmistakable. Mrs. Mitchell. The man extended a hand as she approached. Agent James Reynolds, FBI. I was a colleague of your husband's. I understand you've been making inquiries about his work. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. The name matched what Ryan had said in his phone call, the person she should give the documents to. But the mysterious caller had warned her not to trust anyone claiming to have worked with Ryan. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're talking about, she said carefully. Reynolds smiled thinly. Mrs. Mitchell, I know this is difficult, but Ryan was involved in a sensitive investigation before his death. Any information he might have shared with you could be crucial to national security. He handed her a business card. Please call me if you remember anything. As he turned to leave, he added casually, by the way, how's Tommy doing? And that dog of his, Ranger, isn't it a remarkable animal? Sarah watched him drive away, a sleek black government sedan with tinted windows. She hadn't mentioned Ranger's name. That afternoon, Sarah picked Tommy up from school early, citing a dental appointment that didn't exist. Dr. Winters was waiting in the school office, arms crossed. Mrs. Mitchell, we need to discuss what happened today, the psychologist began. Tommy had an outburst during circle time. When his teacher tried to comfort him, the dog became protective. What kind of outburst? Sarah asked, hand instinctively finding Tommy's shoulder. He began screaming that they found us. Dr. Winters explained, voice lowered. Mrs. Mitchell, I've consulted with my colleagues, and we believe Tommy is experiencing severe post-traumatic stress with paranoid features. His attachment to the dog is enabling these delusions. She hesitated, then continued firmly, I'm recommending a formal psychological evaluation, with temporary separation from the dog. That's not happening, Sarah said flatly. Doctor. Winter's expression hardened. Then I'll have no choice but to involve Child Protective Services. Tommy needs professional help, and your resistance suggests you might not be making decisions in his best interest right now. The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah felt trapped, caught between protecting her son and appearing rational enough to maintain custody of him. I'll consider the evaluation, she finally conceded. But Ranger stays with Tommy. Driving home. Sarah glanced repeatedly in the rearview mirror, suddenly aware of a dark sedan several cars back. The same car made every turn she did, maintaining a consistent distance. Fear prickled along her spine. Tommy, she said as casually as she could manage, do you and Ranger want to visit Grandma in Idaho for a few days? Tommy shook his head vehemently. Can't leave. Daddy's message is here. Sarah nearly swerved off the road. What message, sweetheart? Tommy stared out the window, the one he left for when the bad people came. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah searched Ryan's office again with renewed determination. She ran her hands along the undersides of drawers, behind pictures, beneath the carpet. Nothing. Exhausted. She sank to the floor, leaning against the wall. "Where did you hide it?" "Ryan," she whispered. "What were you trying to tell us?" A soft whine came from the doorway. Ranger stood watching her, head tilted. After a moment, the dog walked purposefully to Ryan's bookshelf and pawed at a thick volume on the bottom shelf, a technical manual on home security systems. Sarah pulled it out, finding nothing unusual until Ranger nudged her hand insistently. She opened the book, discovering the inside had been hollowed out, containing a small voice recorder. With trembling fingers, Sarah pressed play. Ryan's voice filled the room. "Sarah, if you're listening to this, things have gone very wrong. I've uncovered evidence that Martin Cooper has been selling classified weapons systems to foreign intelligence services. The FBI has been investigating, but I've discovered there may be compromised agents within the Bureau itself." A pause, then, "I don't know who to trust anymore. I've given all my evidence to Agent Reynolds, but I'm keeping copies as insurance. If anything happens to me, contact Lieutenant Kevin Anderson at the Pentagon directly. His number is in my contacts under Fishing Guide." Another pause. "I love you and Tommy more than anything. And Sarah, trust Ranger. He knows what to do." The recording ended. Sarah sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of what she'd discovered washing over her. Ryan hadn't been paranoid, he'd been right. And he'd been murdered for it. The next morning, Sarah called Kevin Anderson's number. Heart pounding. The call went to voicemail. She left a vague message about being Ryan Mitchell's wife and needing to speak urgently. Hours later, her cell phone rang a blocked number. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The male voice was clipped, professional. "This is Lieutenant Anderson. I received your message. I'm afraid I can't discuss anything over this line. Can you meet tomorrow, Lakeside Park? 10 a.m. at the boat rental dock?" "I'll be there," Sarah confirmed, relief washing through her. Finally, someone who might actually help. That afternoon, Martin Cooper himself appeared at her door, all solicitous concern and professional condolences. "Sarah, I've been so worried about you and Tommy," he said smoothly. "The company has established a trust fund for Tommy's education. I've brought the paperwork." He extended a thick envelope. "A small token of how much we valued Ryan's contribution to North Star." Ranger positioned himself between Cooper and Tommy, who had come to stand in the hallway. The dog's posture was rigid, a low growl building in his throat. "That's very generous," Sarah said, not reaching for the envelope. "But we're managing fine." Cooper's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I insist. Ryan would have wanted his son taken care of." He stepped forward, and Ranger's growl deepened. "That dog seems rather aggressive. Perhaps professional training would help." "He was professionally trained," Sarah replied evenly. "By my husband." Something flickered in Cooper's eyes, recognition, perhaps, or concern. "Well, my offer stands. We take care of our North Star family." He set the envelope on the side table. "Oh, and Sarah, if you happen to come across any of Ryan's work materials files, notes, that sort of thing, the company would appreciate their return. Confidentiality agreements, you understand." After he left, Sarah opened the envelope. Inside was indeed paperwork for a substantial trust fund, and beneath it, a brochure for a therapeutic wilderness program for troubled children in Montana. A sticky note in Cooper's handwriting read, "Consider this for Tommy. They can accommodate him next week. All expenses covered by North Star." A chill ran through Sarah as she realized the implication. They wanted Tommy away from her, from Ranger. They were trying to separate them. That night, as Sarah tucked Tommy into bed herself, watching Ranger perform his customary security check of the room, she asked gently, "Tommy, what did Daddy tell you about Ranger? About what he's supposed to do?" Tommy looked at her with Ryan's eyes. "Protect me, and show you the safe place if the bad men come." "What safe place, sweetheart?" Tommy shrugged. "Ranger knows. Daddy showed him." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, brushing Tommy's blonde hair from his forehead. "Tomorrow, we're going to meet someone who worked with Daddy. Someone who might help us." Tommy's eyes widened. "Is he a bad man?" "I don't think so," Sarah said carefully. "But Ranger will let us know, won't he?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Ranger always knows the bad ones." "Daddy made sure," as if understanding he was being discussed. Ranger jumped onto the foot of Tommy's bed, something Sarah had never allowed before, but now didn't have the heart to correct. The German Shepherd settled himself protectively, amber eyes alert, even as his body relaxed. Sarah kissed Tommy's forehead and turned out the light, leaving the door cracked as always. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the weight of what she'd learned. Her husband had been murdered. Tommy was in danger, and somehow a German Shepherd held the key to their survival. She took out her phone and composed a text message to Harold. "Need your help tomorrow. Meeting someone at 10. Could be dangerous." After a moment's hesitation, she added, "Bring your old service weapon." The reply came almost instantly. "I'm with you. Be ready to leave at 9:30. Sarah slipped into her bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase she'd packed days ago, clothes for her and Tommy, toiletries, the USB drive, and the recorder. If tomorrow's meeting went badly, they would need to run. But where? And for how long? She sat on her bed, head in her hands. Ryan had trained Ranger to protect Tommy, to recognize threats, even to respond to specific commands. But how far did that training go? And what exactly had Ryan meant when he said Ranger knows what to do? Outside, in the darkness beyond her window, the headlights of a car briefly illuminated the street before going dark. Sarah froze, watching as a shadow moved across her front lawn, pausing beneath the oak tree with a clear view into Tommy's bedroom window. They weren't just being watched anymore, they were being hunted. Sarah's hand trembled as she dialed 911, reporting a prowler on her property. The shadow had disappeared by the time blue and red lights flashed in her driveway 10 minutes later. The responding officers found nothing. No footprints in the soft earth beneath the oak tree. No sign of attempted entry. "Probably just teenagers," one officer suggested with a shrug. "We'll do extra patrols tonight, ma'am." Sarah thanked them, knowing the platitudes were meaningless. Whoever had been watching her house wasn't some random vandal, and no regular patrol would deter them. After the police left, she double-checked every lock, then slipped into Tommy's room. Ranger raised his head at her entrance but didn't move from his position at the foot of the bed. "We need to be ready," she whispered to the dog, feeling only slightly foolish for addressing him as if he understood. Tomorrow might be our only chance. Sarah barely slept, starting awake at every creak of the old house settling. By dawn, she'd given up entirely, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, reviewing the files from Ryan's USB drive for what felt like the 100th time. There had to be something she was missing, some key that would make sense of it all. At 7, she woke Tommy and helped him dress, explaining they were going on a special trip. He didn't question her, his small face solemn as he packed his dinosaur into his backpack. Ranger shadowed their every move, more alert than usual, ears constantly pivoting toward the windows and doors. Harold arrived precisely at 9:30, his weathered face grim beneath his fisherman's hat. "Saw a car down the block when I pulled up," he muttered as he entered. "Black sedan? Government plates? Been there at least an hour." Sarah's stomach tightened. FBI. Maybe. Harold adjusted his jacket, and Sarah caught the telltale bulge of a handgun. "Or someone who wants us to think they're FBI." They left through the back door, cutting through the neighbor's yard to reach Harold's truck parked on the adjacent street. Sarah kept Tommy between them, Ranger trotting ahead, pausing at corners to check their surroundings with a vigilance that belied his canine nature. Lakeside Park was busy for a weekday morning. Mothers with strollers, retirees walking dogs, a school group gathering for what looked like a nature field trip. Sarah scanned the crowd nervously as they approached the boat rental dock. "There!" Harold nodded toward a tall, lean man in his 40s standing at the end of the pier. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a windbreaker, but his posture screamed military. "Wait here with Tommy," Sarah instructed Harold. "If anything seems wrong—" "We're gone," the older man promised, resting a hand on Tommy's shoulder. "Ranger stays with you, though—" Sarah approached the man, Ranger at her heel. Lieutenant Anderson turned at their approach, his sharp features softening slightly when he saw the German shepherd. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "I see Ryan's precautions are still in place," he nodded toward Ranger. "You knew about Ranger?" Sarah asked. "I helped Ryan select him." Anderson's voice was low, measured. "After Ryan brought his concerns about Cooper to us. We knew there was risk. The dog was my suggestion protection that wouldn't raise suspicions." "Protection from what, exactly?" Sarah demanded, keeping her own voice hushed. "What was Ryan involved in?" Anderson sighed. "Your husband uncovered evidence that Martin Cooper was selling classified weapons system specifications to foreign entities, including countries under arms embargoes. We're talking about advanced targeting systems, drone technology, cybersecurity protocols, the kind of information that costs lives when it falls into the wrong hands. Ryan worked in corporate security, not weapons development," Sarah objected. "That was his cover." "Yes. But Ryan was actually part of a counterintelligence task force embedded within defense contractors. His job was to identify security leaks." Anderson's expression darkened. "He was very good at his job. Too good." Eventually, Sarah felt her world tilting again. "So Ryan was—" "What, a spy? An intelligence asset," Anderson corrected. "He identified Cooper as the source of the leaks 3 months before his death. We were building a case, gathering evidence." He shook his head. "We needed to identify Cooper's contacts, the full extent of the network. Ryan was our inside man." "And you got him killed," Sarah said flatly. Anderson didn't flinch from the accusation. "We underestimated Cooper's resources and his ruthlessness. Ryan knew the risks." "Did he?" Did he know he was leaving his 5-year-old son without a father? Sarah's voice broke despite her efforts to remain composed. Ryan made contingency plans. Anderson replied quietly. The dog. The evidence backups. He wanted to ensure you and Tommy would be safe if the worst happened. Well, we're not safe, Sarah hissed. Someone's watching our house. Cooper came by offering to send Tommy to some wilderness program, and an FBI agent named Reynolds is asking questions about Ryan's files. Anderson's expression changed subtly. James Reynolds approached you. Yes? He said Ryan was working with him. Reynolds was Ryan's FBI contact, Anderson confirmed. But we've had concerns about him for weeks. Inconsistencies in his reports. Missing evidence. A child's scream pierced the air. Sarah whirled to see Tommy struggling in the grip of a man in a dark suit, while another grappled with Harold. The older man was on his knees, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Tommy! Sarah started forward, but Anderson grabbed her arm. Wait, he began. But Ranger was already in motion, a tan and black missile streaking across the park. The German Shepherd launched himself at the man holding Tommy, powerful jaws clamping around his forearm. The man screamed, releasing the boy, who immediately ran toward Sarah. Anderson shoved Sarah toward an approaching park ranger. Get them out of here now! He drew a concealed handgun, moving to intercept a third man emerging from behind a maintenance shed. Gunfire erupted, sending park-goers screaming for cover. Sarah scooped up Tommy, running for the ranger's golf cart with Ranger loping beside them. The park ranger, wide-eyed but responsive, gunned the small vehicle toward the parking lot. FBI! A voice shouted behind them. Stop the cart! Sarah turned to see James Reynolds sprinting after them, badge in one hand, gun in the other. The park ranger hesitated, slowing the cart. Don't stop, Sarah pleaded. He's not here to help us. Too late? Reynolds caught up to them, breathing hard, gun trained on the park ranger. Out of the vehicle, he ordered. All of you. Ranger's growl was low, threatening. Reynolds glanced at the dog and smirked. Call off your pet, Mrs. Mitchell, or things will get unpleasant. Sarah clutched Tommy tighter. Ranger, stay, she commanded, the dog reluctantly subsiding but remaining tense, ready to spring. Smart choice, Reynolds said. Now, you and I are going to take a little drive. Cooper wants to speak with you personally about those files you found. You're working for Cooper, Sarah asked, playing for time, frantically scanning the park for Anderson or any sign of help. Reynolds smiled thinly. Let's just say Cooper's associates pay much better than the federal government. Now move. He gestured them toward a black sedan parked at the edge of the lot. Sarah walked slowly, mind racing. If she got into that car, they would never be seen again. Suddenly, Tommy twisted in her arms. Ranger! Rot! He shouted, the strange command hanging in the air for a split second before chaos erupted. Ranger exploded into motion, not toward Reynolds as the agent expected, but toward a nearby trash can, knocking it over with tremendous force. The distraction was momentary, but enough for Sarah to dive behind a parked car, shielding Tommy with her body. Reynolds recovered quickly, turning his weapon toward the German Shepherd. Stupid mutt, he snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. 2 gunshots cracked across the parking lot. Reynolds staggered, looking down in confusion at the spreading crimson stain on his chest before collapsing to the pavement. Behind him stood Harold, one hand pressed to his bleeding head, the other still gripping his service weapon. Sarah! Anderson's voice called out as he sprinted across the lot. "Are you hit? Is Tommy okay?" Sarah emerged shakily from behind the car, checking Tommy for injuries. "We're okay. Where are the others?" "One down, one in custody." Anderson replied grimly, "Cooper's men. We need to move now. This location is blown." Harold lowered himself painfully to a park bench, waving them away. "Go. I'll deal with the police. Got a permit for this anyway." He nodded toward his gun. Anderson guided them to an unmarked SUV at the far end of the lot. "We have a safe house in Boise," he explained as they pulled away. "You'll stay there until we can bring Cooper in." "What about the evidence?" Sarah asked. "The files Ryan collected. We'll need everything you have. With Reynolds compromised, the entire investigation could be tainted." Anderson's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Cooper's reach is longer than we thought." Tommy sat silently in the back seat, one arm around Ranger, staring out the window with unnerving calm for a 5-year-old who had just witnessed a shootout. Occasionally he whispered something into the dog's ear, the German shepherd's intelligent eyes fixed on their driver. They had been driving for about 20 minutes when Tommy suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Anderson is one of them." Sarah turned, startled. "What?" "Sweetie. He's a bad man," Tommy insisted. "Ranger says so." Anderson chuckled, though something in his laugh seemed forced. "Smart kid, but the dog's got it wrong this time. I've been working to protect your family since before Ryan died." Ranger's growl started low, almost imperceptible, but steadily increased in volume. Sarah felt her skin prickle with warning. "Tommy," she said carefully, "how does Ranger tell you who's bad? He has a special bark for the bad men. And Daddy showed me pictures. Mr. Anderson was in them." Tommy's voice was small but certain. "With the man who came to our house." Anderson's expression hardened, the pretense of friendliness evaporating. "Clever boy," he said coldly, "just like his father. Too smart for his own good." His right hand dipped inside his jacket. "Ranger! Fast!" Sarah shouted, hoping she'd heard Tommy's earlier command correctly. The German shepherd lunged between the front seats, powerful jaws clamping around Anderson's arm. The car swerved violently, tires screeching as Anderson fought to maintain control while wrestling with the attacking dog. "Get his gun!" Sarah screamed at Tommy, reaching for the gear shift, yanking it into park. The SUV skidded to a halt on the shoulder, the sudden stop throwing them all forward. Anderson managed to shake free of Ranger long enough to pull his weapon. The dog dodged the first wild shot, but the second caught him in the shoulder, drawing a yelp of pain. Still, the German shepherd persisted, blood matting his tan fur as he continued his assault. Sarah fumbled with her seatbelt, then lunged across the console, grappling for Anderson's gun. The weapon discharged again, the bullet shattering the windshield. With a strength born of desperate maternal protection, Sarah wrenched the pistol from his grasp and scrambled back, pointing it at him with shaking hands. "Don't move," she ordered, voice steadier than she felt. "Tommy, get out of the car. Take Ranger and run to those trees." Anderson's laughter was bitter, blood streaming from the bite wounds on his arm. "You think you've won. Cooper has people everywhere. Ryan found out the hard way. You will too." "Why?" Sarah demanded, keeping the gun trained on him as Tommy slipped out the back door, calling softly for Ranger to follow. "Why would you betray your country, your colleagues? Patriotism doesn't pay for retirement villas in Belize." Anderson sneered. Cooper offered a percentage, enough to disappear forever, and Ryan, collateral damage. He should have looked the other way. Anderson's eyes narrowed. The boy knows too much. Cooper won't stop coming for him. Sarah backed toward the door, keeping the gun steady. Then Cooper will have to go through me. And a wounded dog, Anderson taunted. You're already losing your protector, Sarah. How long before you lose your son, too? In the distance, sirens wailed, growing louder. Someone had reported the gunshots. Sarah had seconds to decide. "Rot," she called over her shoulder, hoping Ranger would understand the command to stay hidden. Then she turned and ran, sprinting toward the tree line where Tommy waited. Behind her, car doors slammed as passing motorists stopped to help what they thought was an accident victim. She reached Tommy and Ranger in the shadows of the pine trees, breath coming in ragged gasps. The German shepherd was bleeding but upright, amber eyes alert despite the pain. "We need to go," she whispered, pulling Tommy deeper into the woods. "We need to find somewhere safe." "I know where," Tommy said with quiet certainty. "Ranger will show us. Daddy said he would." The forest closed around them, pine needles cushioning their footsteps as Sarah led Tommy deeper into the trees, following the wounded Ranger. The German shepherd moved with purpose despite his injury, occasionally looking back to ensure they followed. Blood matted the fur on his shoulder, but his determined stride never faltered. Sarah's mind raced, replaying the confrontation with Anderson. Cooper's reach was even more extensive than she'd feared, extending to the very people Ryan had trusted with his investigation. If Anderson had been compromised, who else was working for Cooper? Who could they possibly trust now? They had nothing but the clothes they wore and the gun Sarah had taken from Anderson. No food, no water, no shelter. And with Tommy's face likely all over police bulletins by nightfall, abducted by his possibly unstable mother, they couldn't risk public places. The weight of their situation pressed down on Sarah's shoulders like a physical burden. "Mommy, Ranger needs help." Tommy's small voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. The boy pointed to the dog's bloody shoulder. Sarah knelt beside Ranger, gently examining the wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing bone and vital vessels, a lucky break. Still, the German shepherd needed medical attention they couldn't provide. "I know, sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But we need to find somewhere safe first." "The cabin," Tommy said with certainty. "Daddy's special place. Ranger knows the way." Sarah stared at her son. "What cabin?" "Tommy, the secret one, where Daddy took me fishing when you had teacher meetings." Tommy's matter-of-fact tone suggested this was common knowledge. "Ranger is taking us there." Sarah felt a surge of mingled hope and betrayal. A secret cabin Ryan had never mentioned. Yet another compartment of his life kept hidden from her. But if it existed, it might be their only sanctuary. They walked for hours, following old logging roads and game trails, keeping to the shadows. Twice they ducked down as vehicles passed nearby, once a sheriff's patrol car, once an unmarked black sedan that made Sarah's blood run cold each time. Ranger alerted them moments before the engines became audible, giving them precious seconds to hide. By late afternoon, Tommy's steps had slowed to a trudge. The 5-year-old had been astonishingly resilient, but even his endurance had limits. Sarah carried him piggyback for stretches, her legs burning with exhaustion, her throat parched. Ranger limped ahead, stopping periodically to let them catch up, his intelligent eyes seeming to gauge their condition. "Not much further," Sarah encouraged, though she had no idea if it was true. She was following a dog through wilderness based on the word of a traumatized kindergartner. The absurdity of their situation would have made her laugh if desperation hadn't choked her throat. The sun was setting when Ranger led them to a small clearing beside a stream. No cabin was visible, only trees and undergrowth. Sarah's heart sank. Had she misunderstood? Was this simply a place to rest? But Ranger continued purposefully to a rocky outcropping covered in moss and lichen. The German shepherd pawed at a section of ground beside the rocks, whining softly. Tommy wiggled down from Sarah's back and hurried over. "It's here!" he exclaimed, dropping to his knees and pushing aside dead leaves and branches. Together, boy and dog uncovered a trap door, nearly invisible against the forest floor. Sarah stood paralyzed with disbelief as Tommy tugged at an iron ring, revealing a steep staircase descending into darkness. The construction was solid. Professional, not some weekend hunter's project, but a deliberately concealed shelter. "Tommy." "Wait," she began, but the boy was already descending. Ranger at his heels. With no choice, Sarah followed, pulling the door closed above them. Battery-powered lights flickered on automatically as they reached the bottom of the stairs, illuminating a space that made Sarah gasp. Not a rough cabin, but a fully equipped underground shelter. A single room about 20 feet square with concrete walls, stocked shelves, a small kitchen area, 2 bunk beds, and a communications setup that belonged in a military installation. "Daddy brought me here for special camping," Tommy explained, moving confidently through the space. He opened a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit. For Ranger. Sarah stood frozen, trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't a weekend getaway. This was a safe house, prepared by a man who knew he might need to disappear. A man who had trained his dog to bring his son here if the worst happened. A man she was beginning to believe she had never really known at all. With trembling hands, Sarah helped clean and bandage Ranger's wound. The German shepherd submitted to their ministrations stoically, only whimpering once when Sarah applied antiseptic to the torn flesh. Tommy murmured comfort to the dog in a steady stream of encouragement that broke Sarah's heart, her 5-year-old, who barely spoke to humans, pouring out words of love to the animal who had saved his life. Only after Ranger was tended to did Sarah explore their sanctuary. The shelves held enough food and water for weeks. A small generator hummed in one corner, powering the lights and ventilation system. A gun safe stood bolted to the wall, locked, with no key visible. Most surprising was a satellite communication setup with a laptop secured to a desk. When she pressed the power button, the screen illuminated, displaying a password prompt. Sarah tried several combinations before slumping back in frustration. Whatever final messages Ryan had left, they remained tantalizingly out of reach. Tommy and Ranger had settled on one of the bunks, the boy's small arms wrapped around the dog's neck, both exhausted from their ordeal. Sarah covered them with a blanket, tears stinging her eyes at the tableau they created her son and his protector, united in a trust that transcended words. Sarah sat at the communications desk, head in her hands. They were safe for the moment. But what next? They couldn't stay hidden forever. Cooper and his network were still out there, still hunting them. Anderson was likely already spinning a story about her kidnapping Tommy, portraying her as unstable, dangerous. How long before they tracked them here? The sense of betrayal cut deeper than fear. Ryan had created this place. trained ranger, prepared for catastrophe, all without telling her. He'd drawn their son into his secret world, teaching him commands, showing him escape routes, while maintaining the fiction of a normal family life with his wife. Had he ever trusted her at all? Or had she just been another compartment in his segmented life in one box? Spy games in another. The worst part was knowing she might never get answers. Ryan was gone. And the dead kept their secrets well. Sarah's gaze fell on a framed photo beside the laptop, the only personal touch in the utilitarian space. It showed the three of them, Sarah, Ryan, and Tommy, laughing on a beach vacation 2 years earlier. Ryan's arm was around her shoulders, his smile carefree in a way she now recognized as rare. He'd been carrying his burdens even then, she realized, carrying them alone. Exhaustion overwhelmed her suddenly, the adrenaline of the day giving way to bone-deep weariness. Sarah stumbled to the empty bunk and collapsed, not bothering to remove her shoes. Their situation remained dire, their future uncertain, but for this moment, at least, they were safe. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new decisions. For now, she surrendered to the darkness of dreamless sleep. Her last conscious thought was of Ranger's unwavering loyalty. Perhaps Ryan hadn't trusted her with his secrets, but he had trusted her with their son's life. The German Shepherd was proof of that, a guardian who would never abandon his post, no matter the cost. Sarah awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the windowless concrete walls and the steady hum of the ventilation system. For a terrifying instant, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back: the ambush at the park, Anderson's betrayal, their desperate flight through the forest. She sat up, heart pounding, to find Tommy already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Ranger. The German Shepherd looked better this morning, his intelligent eyes alert despite the bandaged shoulder. Tommy was speaking to him in a low voice, one small hand gently stroking the dog's head. The sight brought a lump to Sarah's throat. Her son, who'd barely spoken since Ryan's death, communicating freely with the animal who had saved his life. "He says his arm hurts, but he's okay," Tommy announced, noticing Sarah was awake. "And he's hungry." Sarah managed a smile. "Well, let's see what Dad stocked in this place, shall we?" The shelter supplies were meticulously organized: canned goods, dried foods, bottled water, even a small freezer powered by the generator containing vacuum-sealed meats. Sarah prepared a simple breakfast, setting aside unseasoned ground beef for Ranger. As they ate, she studied Tommy, trying to reconcile the silent, withdrawn child of recent months with this more animated version who seemed to have emerged in the midst of crisis. "Tommy," she began carefully, "how often did Daddy bring you here?" Tommy shrugged. "Sometimes, when you had meetings." "And what did you do here?" "Practice," he said simply. "Practice what?" "Sweetheart. Ranger stuff. Commands." He demonstrated a hand signal, fingers splayed, then closed to a fist. "This means find safe place." And this, he made another gesture, means danger person. Sarah felt a chill. Ryan had been training their son in what amounted to escape and evasion techniques, disguised as games with the dog. How long had he known he was in danger? How long had he been preparing Tommy for a world without him? After breakfast, Sarah turned her attention to the communications system. The laptop remained frustratingly password protected. but beside it stood a satellite radio with a simple numbered keypad. On impulse, she tried the date of Ryan and Tommy's first camping trip to the shelter. The radio hummed to life, displaying a single pre-programmed frequency. Sarah hesitated, finger hovering over the transmit button. If this was Ryan's emergency communication system, who was on the other end? Another compromised agent like Anderson Cooper himself. But they had no other options. They couldn't remain hidden forever, and Ranger needed proper veterinary care. She pressed the button. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell." Static crackled for several seconds. Then a cautious female voice responded, "Authentication phrase required." Sarah's heart sank. She had no idea what password or phrase Ryan might have established. She looked helplessly at Tommy, who was watching with interest. "Tommy, did Daddy ever tell you any special words to say on the radio, like a secret code?" Tommy thought for a moment, then nodded. He took the handset from Sarah. "The wolf watches at midnight," he said clearly into the microphone. More static. Then, "Authentication accepted. Hold position. Assistance inbound. Estimated arrival, 3 hours. Out?" Sarah stared at the radio, then at her son. "Tommy, who taught you that phrase?" "Daddy," he said simply. "For if we ever had to use the special radio." 3 hours later, Sarah tensed at the sound of the trapdoor opening above them. She positioned herself between Tommy and the stairs, Anderson's gun steady in her hands. Ranger stood beside her, fur bristling despite his injury, a low growl vibrating in his chest. A woman appeared on the stairs, mid-30s, athletic build, carrying a medical bag rather than a weapon. Her hands were visible, movements deliberately slow. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Agent Lauren Reed, Defense Intelligence Agency. Ryan and I work together." She reached carefully into her jacket and produced a badge. "I'm here to help." Sarah didn't lower the gun. "That's what Anderson said, too." Reed nodded grimly. "Lieutenant Anderson's betrayal has compromised our entire operation. That's why I'm here alone. We don't know who else might be working with Cooper." "Prove you knew my husband," Sarah demanded. Reed's expression softened slightly. "Ryan kept a photo of you and Tommy on his desk. He called you his compass, said no matter how deep the cover, you kept him oriented to what mattered." She glanced at Ranger. "And he spent 6 months personally training that dog. Said it was the best insurance policy he could give his son." Sarah slowly lowered the gun, the specific details ringing true in a way general knowledge wouldn't. "Anderson tried to kill us." "I know," Reed confirmed. "He's in custody now, but he's not talking." "What about Cooper? In the wind?" "His accounts were emptied yesterday. We think he's trying to leave the country." Reed knelt to examine Ranger's wound. "Your dog needs antibiotics, but he'll be all right. You did good work here." "He's not just our dog," Sarah said quietly. "He's the last gift Ryan gave us." Reed spent the next hour debriefing them, recording Sarah's account of the events at the park, the confrontation with Anderson, and everything she had learned from Ryan's files. Tommy sat beside Ranger during the questioning, occasionally whispering to the German Shepherd but otherwise silent. "Cooper's network is extensive," Reed explained, reviewing notes on her tablet. "We've identified connections to at least 3 foreign intelligence services. The technology he sold has already compromised operations in Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. People have died because of the information he provided. And Ryan discovered this? Reed nodded. Ryan was conducting a routine security audit when he found irregularities in the export control documentation, shell companies, falsified end-user certificates. He started pulling the threads, and the whole thing unraveled. She glanced at Tommy, lowering her voice. He knew it was dangerous. That's why he created all these contingencies, this shelter, Rangers training, the dead drops. Dead drops, Sarah repeated. Information caches, Reed clarified. Ryan didn't trust digital storage for his most crucial evidence. Too easily compromised. He created physical backups, hidden in locations only he knew. Sarah thought of the USB drive, the hollowed-out book. I found some of those, but not all, Reed said, meeting her eyes. The most damning evidence, the piece that would conclusively tie Cooper to treason and murder, is still missing. A cold realization washed over Sarah. That's why Cooper is still hunting us. He thinks we have it. Or that Tommy knows where it is. Reed nodded grimly. Anderson admitted that much under interrogation. Cooper believes Ryan told Tommy the location of the final evidence cache disguised as a game or a special secret between father and son. Sarah looked at Tommy, who was now dozing against Ranger's uninjured side. He's 5 years old. Ryan would have done whatever necessary to bring Cooper down. Reed interrupted gently, even using his own son as a courier. He believed the stakes were that high. The thought was simultaneously horrifying and yet consistent with the Ryan that Sarah was only now beginning to know. A man who had built a hidden shelter, trained a military dog, and taught his kindergartner escape routes and authentication phrases. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, exhaustion bleeding into her voice. "We move you to a secure location," Reed replied. "Formal witness protection until Cooper is apprehended. New identities. New location, possibly overseas." The prospect of leaving everything behind, her job, their friends. Ryan's grave struck Sarah with unexpected force. But what choice did they have? Cooper's reach was long, his resources substantial. They would never be safe as long as he remained free. "And Ranger?" Sarah asked. "Comes with you." "Of course," Reed said, as if the alternative was unthinkable. "He's not just a pet, he's a highly trained protection asset. And clearly, Tommy needs him." That night, after Reed had departed to make arrangements for their extraction the following morning, Sarah sat beside the communications desk, staring at the locked laptop. There had to be something she was missing, some password or clue that would unlock Ryan's final messages. Tommy approached sleepily, climbing onto her lap. "Can't sleep," he murmured. Sarah held him close, breathing in the little boy's scent of his hair. "I know, sweetheart." "It's been a scary day." Tommy looked up at her with Ryan's blue eyes. "Are we going away?" "Yes," Sarah admitted. "To somewhere safe, where the bad men can't find us." "But Daddy is here," Tommy protested. "I know it's hard to leave where Daddy is buried," Sarah began gently. "No," Tommy interrupted with unusual vehemence. "Daddy is here." He pointed at the laptop. "He left messages. But you need the right words." Sarah's heart quickened. "Do you know the right words, Tommy?" Tommy nodded solemnly, sliding off her lap to stand before the keyboard. His small fingers moved with surprising confidence, typing a phrase, "Tommy Ranger, champion." The screen flickered, then filled with folders and files, dozens of them, meticulously organized and labeled, and in the center, a video file named simply for Sarah. With trembling fingers, Sarah clicked on it. Ryan's face filled the screen, not the official corporate headshot she was used to seeing, but her husband in their home. Eyes tired but determined. He wore the flannel shirt she'd given him for Christmas, his wedding ring visible as he ran a hand through his hair. "Sarah," his recorded voice began, steady despite the gravity of his words. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone, and you found yourself in the middle of something dangerous and confusing. I'm so sorry for that. Sorry for the secrets, for the lies, for putting you and Tommy at risk." He paused, and Sarah could see him struggling to maintain composure. "I've discovered something terrible at North Star. Martin Cooper has been selling classified weapons specifications to foreign governments, including some that actively sponsor terrorism against American interests. The technology he's compromised will cost lives, has already cost lives." Ryan leaned closer to the camera, his voice dropping as if sharing a confidence. "I've gathered evidence, enough to put Cooper away for life. Most of it is on this computer. But the most crucial piece, the one that ties everything directly to Cooper, I've hidden separately. It was too dangerous to keep with the other materials." Sarah held her breath, heart pounding as Ryan continued. "I've hidden it where Cooper would never think to look in plain sight, at his own charity gala. The evidence is inside the ceremonial clock they awarded me last year for corporate citizenship, the one in my office. The back panel slides open if you press the Roman numerals in the right sequence, 7, 4, I-12. Inside is a microdrive with recordings of Cooper discussing the sales with foreign agents. The clock is the key to everything." The clock. Sarah remembered it well, an ornate brass monstrosity that Ryan had jokingly called corporate gilt, shaped like a timepiece. The Cooper's Foundation gave them to major donors and key employees at their annual gala. "If anything happens to me," Ryan continued, his voice breaking slightly, "get Tommy and Ranger somewhere safe. Then get that evidence to Lauren Reed at DIA. She's the only one I trust completely. Cooper has people throughout the intelligence community, Reynolds and Anderson for certain, possibly others." Ryan's image leaned back, his face softening. "Sarah, I know you must feel betrayed finding out this way. I wanted to tell you everything so many times, but the rules." He shook his head. "No, that's an excuse. The truth is, I was afraid you'd ask me to stop, to choose our family over the mission, and afraid you might look at me differently if you knew what I was really doing." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as Ryan's image delivered his final words. "I love you and Tommy more than anything in this world. More than duty, more than country. Everything I've done the shelter. Ranger, all of it was to keep you both safe if my work ever followed me home. Please tell Tommy that Daddy is so proud of him. And Sarah, you are still my compass. Even now. Always." The video ended, freezing on Ryan's face, eyes filled with love and regret in equal measure. Sarah sat in stunned silence, the final pieces clicking into place. The clock. The evidence that would bring down Cooper's entire network was sitting in plain sight in Ryan's office, an office that Cooper and his men had undoubtedly searched extensively, but they hadn't found it because they didn't know what to look for. Sarah reached for the satellite phone Reed had left them, hope kindling for the first time in days. They had a chance, a real chance to end this nightmare and bring Ryan's killers to justice. The clock was still ticking for Martin Cooper. He just didn't know it yet. 1 month after the confrontation at Lakeside Park, Sarah Mitchell stood at the kitchen window of a modest suburban home in Portland, Oregon, watching Tommy throw a tennis ball for Ranger in their fenced backyard. The German Shepherd moved with only the slightest hint of stiffness in his left shoulder. His recovery nearly complete. Tommy's laughter floated through the open window, a sound that had once been rare but now filled their days with increasing frequency. The Witness Protection Program had given them new identities. She was now Ellen Warren, recently widowed mother of Jacob Warren. Their cover story was simple, a fresh start after the loss of her husband to cancer. The program had found her a teaching position at a local elementary school starting in the fall, and Tommy Jacob was enrolled in kindergarten. The house was pleasant, if unremarkable, chosen for its security features and proximity to a good school. Not home, but safe. Sarah fingered the simple gold chain around her neck, from which hung Ryan's wedding ring. Some nights she still woke, reaching for him. The emptiness beside her, a physical ache that time had only slightly dulled. But those moments came less frequently now, healing gradually like Ranger's shoulder wound. The events following their discovery of Ryan's hidden video message still felt like a fever dream. Lauren Reed had moved with astonishing efficiency once Sarah relayed the information about the clock. A covert team had retrieved it from Ryan's office during a staged fire alarm at North Star headquarters. The extraction executed so cleanly that Cooper never realized what they'd taken. The evidence inside had been exactly as Ryan described, recorded conversations proving Cooper's direct involvement in selling classified weapons systems to foreign entities, complete with banking records showing millions funneled into offshore accounts. But the recordings contained something even Ryan hadn't known: proof that Cooper had personally ordered Ryan's murder, instructing Anderson to tamper with the brakes on his SUV. "Make it look like an accident," Cooper's voice had said on the recording. "No loose ends. Mitchell's gotten too close." Cooper had been arrested attempting to board a private jet to Venezuela. The media coverage had been explosive. Defense contractor CEO charged with espionage and murder dominated headlines for weeks. The investigation had expanded, revealing a network of compromised officials and intelligence agents that extended far beyond Reynolds and Anderson. The damage Cooper had done to national security would take years to fully assess and mitigate. Through it all, Ranger had remained Tommy's constant companion, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. The German Shepherd's presence seemed to anchor the boy, giving him the security he needed to begin processing his grief. Tommy still had nightmares, still had days when he wouldn't speak to anyone but Ranger. But those episodes were becoming less frequent, less intense. The doorbell rang, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. She checked the security monitor, a precaution that had become second nature before opening the door to Lauren Reed. The DIA agent looked different in civilian clothes, her usual tactical gear replaced by jeans and a casual blazer. "How are you settling in?" Reed asked, accepting Sarah's invitation to enter. "Getting there," Sarah replied, leading her to the kitchen where she poured 2 cups of coffee. "Tommy's doing better?" "The therapist says his progress is remarkable, given everything he's been through." Reed nodded, watching through the window as Tommy commanded Ranger to sit, then stay, before hiding the tennis ball behind a tree. The German Shepherd waited patiently until Tommy gave the release command, then raced to recover the ball. "The bond between them is extraordinary," Reed observed. "Ryan would be pleased. Some days I'm still angry with him," Sarah admitted. "For the secrets, for putting Tommy in danger, for training our son like some kind of child operative." Ryan was trying to protect him the only way he knew how, Reed said gently. Intelligence work becomes a lens through which you see the world threats everywhere, contingency plans for every scenario. I know, Sarah sighed. And it worked. Ranger saved Tommy's life. Those games Ryan taught him kept our son alive. She shook her head. It's just hard to reconcile the Ryan I thought I knew with the man who built hidden shelters and trained military dogs. He was both, Reed suggested, the loving husband and father, and the dedicated intelligence officer. One didn't negate the other. Sarah nodded, acknowledging the truth in Reed's words. Part of her healing process had been accepting that Ryan's compartmentalization, while painful to discover, had come from a place of love. He had created firewalls between his work and his family, not to deceive Sarah, but to protect her and Tommy from exactly the danger that had ultimately claimed his life. I have news, Reed said, changing the subject. Cooper's trial date is set for January. The prosecutor believes it's an airtight case, the recordings, the financial records, Anderson's testimony. Will we need to testify? Sarah asked, tension creeping into her voice. Tommy won't, Reed assured her quickly. They've deemed him too young, and his testimony isn't necessary with the evidence we have. You may be called, but with limited exposure, video deposition, closed courtroom. Sarah nodded, relief washing through her. The thought of Tommy facing Cooper across a courtroom had haunted her nightmares. There's something else, Reed continued, her expression softening. We finished the full investigation of Ryan's activities. She withdrew a sealed envelope from her blazer. This contains his official service record, the real one, not the cover story. It details every operation, every contribution he made. His work saved lives. Sarah, many lives. Sarah accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you. There's also this, Reed added, producing a smaller package. His Distinguished Intelligence Cross. It's awarded posthumously for exceptional service involving voluntary risk of life. Ryan's the first civilian contractor to receive it in over a decade. Sarah opened the small box to reveal a silver cross suspended from a blue ribbon. Such a small token to represent such an enormous sacrifice. She closed it carefully and set it aside for Tommy. One day, when he was older, it would help him understand the man his father had been. They talked for another hour about Cooper's network, about the trial, about the modifications DIA had made to the house to enhance security. As Reed prepared to leave, she paused at the door. There's one more thing you should know, she said hesitantly. Ryan left a will with his handler separate from his civilian will. In it, he established a trust fund for Tommy's education and for Ranger's care. She smiled slightly. He specified that Ranger was to remain with Tommy under all circumstances and provided for regular veterinary checkups, specialized food, everything. He thought of everything. After Reed's departure, Sarah called Tommy and Ranger in for dinner. The routine they'd established over the past month brought comfort in its predictability, setting the table together. Ranger waiting patiently in his designated spot, Tommy chattering about the squirrels he'd seen in the backyard. These ordinary moments felt like precious gifts after the chaos they'd survived. That night, Sarah watched from the doorway as Tommy went through his bedtime ritual with Ranger. The German Shepherd still pulled the covers up, still nestled the stuffed dinosaur beside Tommy, still took his position at the foot of the bed with vigilant eyes checking each corner of the room. But what had once seemed eerie now brought Sarah comfort. Ranger wasn't just following programming, he was honoring a promise made to Ryan, a commitment to protect what had mattered most to his handler. "Mommy," Tommy said as she bent to kiss his forehead, "is Daddy a hero?" Sarah touched the wedding ring hanging from her necklace. "Yes, sweetheart. A real hero. Like in my books, fighting bad guys. A different kind of hero," Sarah explained carefully. "One who worked very hard to keep people safe, even when it was dangerous. Who made sure we would be safe, no matter what." Tommy nodded, accepting this. "That's why he gave us Ranger." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly. "That's exactly why." After Tommy fell asleep, Sarah retreated to the small home office where Reed had helped her set up a secure computer system. She opened the file containing copies of the evidence from the ceremonial clock evidence that had shattered Cooper's carefully constructed empire. She had reviewed these files countless times, searching for any loose ends, any threats that might still endanger Tommy, but tonight, she opened a different folder, one containing personal photos salvaged from Ryan's laptop. Images of their family in happier times. Tommy's 3rd birthday, their last Christmas together. A day at the lake when Ryan had taught Tommy to fish, ordinary moments made extraordinary by their scarcity. A video file caught her attention, one she hadn't noticed before, labeled simply "Family." Sarah clicked on it hesitantly. Ryan's face appeared, not in the serious, mission-oriented expression of his final message, but relaxed, smiling. He was filming himself in what looked like a hotel room. "Hey, Sarah. Tommy, just wanted to say goodnight. The conference runs late tomorrow, so I'll probably miss our usual call." He glanced away briefly, then back at the camera. "I miss you guys. Tommy, I hope you're being good for your mom. I'll be home Saturday. And maybe we can try out that new fishing spot." He paused, his expression softening further. "Sarah, I was thinking about that vacation we talked about, the one to Maine. Let's do it this summer. No more excuses, no more postponing." He smiled, the unguarded smile she had fallen in love with. Life's too short to keep putting off the important stuff. The video ended, freezing on Ryan's smiling face. Sarah touched the screen gently, tears blurring her vision. This was the Ryan she had known, loving, present, making plans for a future he wouldn't live to see. She wiped her eyes and closed the laptop. Outside, rain had begun to fall, drumming softly against the windows of their new home. In Tommy's room, she knew Ranger would be alert to the changing sounds, constantly vigilant even as the household slept. Tomorrow, they would continue building their new life school, shopping for Tommy, finalizing lesson plans for her new teaching position. Another session with the trauma specialist who was helping them both process their grief and fear. Small steps toward healing, toward something resembling normalcy. Sarah moved through the house, checking locks and setting the security system precautions that had become ritual. At Tommy's door, she paused, watching her son's peaceful sleep. Ranger raised his head, amber eyes meeting hers in the dim glow of the nightlight. The German shepherd's gaze held an understanding that transcended his canine nature, a shared commitment to the sleeping child they both loved. "Good boy," Sarah whispered. "Good guard." Ranger's tail thumped once against the bed. Then he resettled, maintaining his protective position. Sarah returned to her bedroom. slipping beneath the covers with Ryan's final letter delivered by Reed from a dead drop he'd established before his death. "Sarah," the letter began, "if you're reading this, I failed to come home to you and Tommy. I'm so sorry. Know that every secret I kept to protect you both. Every lie I told was so I wouldn't have to lie about loving you. That has always been the most honest part of my life." Sarah read the letter again, finding new comfort in words she'd nearly memorized over the past month. Ryan had known the risks, had faced them willingly to protect others, had prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. On her nightstand sat a framed photo, the three of them at Tommy's 4th birthday, laughing as Ranger tried to steal a hot dog from the picnic table. Their last birthday together as a complete family. Next to it stood a new photo, Tommy and Ranger playing in their Portland backyard, the boy's smile bright enough to cast shadows. Life continuing, despite everything. New memories forming alongside the precious old ones. Not the life she had planned, but one with purpose, with love, with the legacy of a man who had given everything to protect what mattered most. Outside, the rain continued its gentle rhythm, washing away the last traces of summer heat. Autumn approached, bringing with it Tommy's first day at his new school, Sarah's return to teaching, a calendar filling with ordinary commitments that once seemed impossible. The invisible weight of Cooper's threat had lifted, allowing them to breathe, to plan, to hope again. In his room, Tommy slept peacefully, one arm flung over Ranger's strong back. The German shepherd maintained his watch through the night, fulfilling a promise made to a man long gone but never forgotten. Guardian, protector, living legacy of a father's love. The Mitchell family endured changed, wounded, but healing together. Little Tommy Mitchell's story isn't just about a boy and his loyal German shepherd. It's about the extraordinary lengths a father went to protect his child, even beyond the grave. When Ryan Mitchell sensed danger approaching his family, he prepared in the only way he knew how, by training Ranger to be Tommy's guardian if the worst should happen. For those of us who've raised children in an increasingly uncertain world, this story strikes a chord deep within our hearts. We understand that visceral, primal need to protect our loved ones, to establish safeguards that will outlast us. Tommy's bedtime ritual with Ranger, the careful tucking in, the watchful presence through the night, reminds us that love transcends death, that the bonds we forge continue even when we're gone. As we enter our golden years, many of us worry about the legacy we're leaving behind, the protection we can still provide to our children and grandchildren. Ryan Mitchell's story reassures us that with enough love and foresight, we can still shield them, even when we're no longer physically present. The greatest gift isn't wealth or possessions, but knowing our loved ones will never truly face life's dangers alone.